The machines beeped steadily beside him, but Daniel Whitfield was not asleep, and he was not lost in darkness. He was wide awake, listening, his eyes shut, his body still, while the woman he was about to marry stood just a few feet away, laughing quietly into her phone as if he could not hear a single word. Nobody in that hospital room knew the truth. Daniel was not in a coma at all. He had chosen this. He had chosen silence, stillness, and the risk of everyone believing he might never wake up, because it was the only way to finally see who Vanessa really was when she thought no one was watching. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had been driving home from a late meeting when a truck skidded across the wet highway and slammed into his car. He remembered the impact, the spinning lights, and then nothing until he woke up in a hospital bed with a mild concussion and a fractured wrist. The doctors told him he had been fortunate. His injuries, while painful, were far less serious than they first appeared. But lying there in that quiet room, staring at the ceiling, Daniel felt something else stir inside him, something sharper than pain. For months he had noticed small things about Vanessa that did not add up. The late nights she blamed on work, the phone she never let out of her sight, the way she flinched whenever he asked an innocent question about her day. He had always told himself he was imagining things, that a woman as devoted as she seemed could never be hiding something. But now, with his body giving him the perfect excuse to disappear from the world for a little while, an idea took root that he could not shake loose. What if he simply let people believe he was still unconscious? What if, instead of announcing his recovery, he stayed silent just a little longer and watched? It was a strange and difficult decision, one that went against every instinct of honesty he had built his life on. Yet the more he thought about it, the more he felt he owed it to himself to know the truth before he promised the rest of his life to someone. He was not looking for a reason to end things. He was looking for peace of mind, for proof that his fears were nothing but exhaustion and stress. He told himself this again and again, hoping he was wrong about everything. He found a doctor at the hospital, a calm and thoughtful man named Dr. Ellis, who had known Daniel for years and who agreed, after much hesitation, to help him extend the appearance of his condition. It would only be for a short while, Daniel promised, just long enough to understand what he was truly walking into. Dr. Ellis warned him that deception, even with good intentions, could cause real damage if it went on too long. Daniel nodded, understanding the risk, but he had already made up his mind. He needed to see the people around him with no mask between them and him, no performance for his benefit, no filtered version of the truth. He needed to see Vanessa when she believed there was nothing left to hide. As the machines continued their steady rhythm, and the world outside his door moved on without him, Daniel lay still and waited for the truth to walk into the room. He had no idea just how far that truth would take him, or how much his life was about to change because of a decision made in a moment of quiet desperation. The days that followed tested Daniel in ways he never expected. Lying motionless for hours at a time was harder than he imagined, not because of physical discomfort, but because of the emotional weight of hearing his own life discussed as if he were already gone. Colleagues visited and spoke about his business as though he might never return to run it. Distant relatives whispered about what would happen to his assets. And through it all, Vanessa played the role of the devoted fiancée perfectly, holding his hand in front of visitors, dabbing at tears that never quite reached her eyes, speaking softly about how much she missed him. But the moment the door closed and she believed she was alone with an unconscious man, her voice changed completely. She would sigh with impatience, checking her watch, complaining under her breath about how long recovery was taking. She spoke to someone on the phone in hushed, hurried tones, telling them she could not talk long because she needed to keep up appearances at the hospital. Daniel's heart pounded every time he heard her voice shift like that, but he forced his body to stay still, his breathing steady, giving nothing away. It was one thing to suspect dishonesty. It was another thing entirely to lie there and listen to it unfold in real time. One afternoon, a woman named Priya, one of the nurses on his floor, mentioned to a colleague that Vanessa had asked several unusual questions about his recovery timeline, questions that seemed less concerned with his well-being and more focused on how long the insurance process might take. Daniel filed the detail away quietly, adding it to the growing list of things that did not sit right. He began to understand that his suspicions, the ones he had dismissed for months as paranoia, might have been trying to warn him all along. Despite the ache of hearing these things, Daniel refused to rush his decision. He did not want to act out of anger or assumption. He wanted proof, clear and undeniable, before he confronted anyone or made any drastic choices about his future. So he continued the difficult performance, day after day, letting the world believe he was somewhere far away, while in truth he had never been more alert. It was during this stretch of quiet observation that someone unexpected became a constant presence in his hospital room, someone whose visits had nothing to do with obligation or appearances. Rosa Delgado, who had worked in his home for 3 years, came to see him not because anyone asked her to, but because she genuinely cared whether he lived or died. She would sit beside his bed after her shifts elsewhere, sometimes speaking softly to him the way people often do with those who cannot answer back, believing her words disappeared into silence. She had no idea that every sentence she spoke was landing directly in the mind of a man piecing together the truth about his own life, one quiet visit at a time. Rosa had always been careful and respectful in the Whitfield home, keeping her opinions to herself even when she noticed things that troubled her. She cleaned the house, prepared meals, and tended to small tasks that kept the household running smoothly, all while staying quietly in the background the way many people in her position learned to do. But being invisible to others meant she often saw things they never bothered to hide from her. She had seen a stranger's jacket left carelessly on a chair one afternoon when Daniel was away on business. She had noticed a cologne in the house that did not belong to him, lingering in rooms where it had no reason to be. At the time, she told herself it was not her place to say anything. It was not her business to question the people who paid her wages. But sitting beside Daniel's hospital bed, believing him lost in unconsciousness, something in her shifted. She began speaking freely, the way people do when they think no one is truly listening. She mentioned how strange it felt, coming to the house lately, how the energy had changed, how Vanessa seemed distracted and short-tempered in a way she had never been before the accident. She spoke about a man who had started visiting when Daniel was away, someone Rosa did not recognize, someone Vanessa introduced only once as an old friend, before quickly changing the subject whenever his name came up again. Rosa mentioned the whispered phone calls Vanessa took in the garage, always with the door shut, always ending abruptly if anyone walked near. She spoke about finding a hotel receipt tucked into the pocket of a coat while doing the laundry, a receipt for a date when Vanessa had claimed she was staying late at the office. Rosa had folded the coat carefully and said nothing at the time, unsure what any of it meant and unwilling to cause trouble over something that might have an innocent explanation. Daniel lay perfectly still, absorbing every word, his mind racing even as his body remained motionless. Each detail Rosa shared connected to something he had already begun to suspect, filling in gaps he had not been able to explain on his own. He felt a mixture of grief and clarity wash over him, grief for the relationship he had believed in, and clarity about the path he now needed to take. Rosa had no idea the impact her quiet, unguarded words were having. She simply believed she was sitting with a man who could not hear her, offering him company in his stillness. In truth, she was handing him the very pieces he needed to understand the shape of the betrayal closing in around his life. By the time Daniel was cleared to leave the hospital, he had made a decision. He would continue to appear weaker than he truly was for a little longer, giving himself room to quietly gather proof without raising suspicion. He returned home in a wheelchair, moving slowly and speaking little, allowing Vanessa to believe his recovery was still fragile and uncertain. Behind that careful performance, his mind was sharper than it had been in months. He began looking through documents he normally would not have questioned, bank statements, old messages, anything that might confirm what Rosa's words had already suggested. He found withdrawals from a shared account, sent to a name he did not recognize, spread out over several months in amounts small enough that he might never have noticed them under normal circumstances. He found a second phone tucked inside a drawer in Vanessa's closet, hidden beneath folded scarves, its screen locked but its presence undeniable. He found the same hotel receipt Rosa had mentioned, still sitting in the pocket of that coat, dated during a week Vanessa had told him she was working late every night. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in a way Daniel never expected. His business partner, a man named Craig Bennett, had been unusually attentive during his recovery, visiting often, offering to handle company decisions, gently suggesting that perhaps Daniel should step back from certain responsibilities until he was fully healed. At first, Daniel appreciated the support, but something about Craig's eagerness felt calculated rather than kind. When Daniel quietly checked recent company records, he discovered signatures and approvals made in his name during the weeks he was supposedly unable to communicate, decisions that shifted control of certain contracts toward Craig himself. The truth, once scattered and uncertain, now formed a clear and painful picture. Vanessa had not simply been distant or distracted during his recovery. She had been building a life alongside Craig, one that involved both his heart and his company, confident that a man believed to be unconscious could not stand in her way. The betrayal cut deeper than Daniel expected, not only because of the affair itself, but because of how calmly and carefully it had been planned around his suffering. Rather than confront them in anger, Daniel chose patience one final time. He wanted the truth to come out where everyone could see it clearly, without doubt or excuse. He began quietly gathering every piece of evidence he had found, preparing for a moment when the mask would finally come off, not just his own, but everyone else's as well. Daniel planned his moment carefully. He told Vanessa he wanted to celebrate his recovery with a small gathering at the house, inviting close friends, a few relatives, and at his quiet suggestion, Craig Bennett as well. Vanessa seemed pleased, relieved even, as though the difficult chapter of his accident was finally closing behind them. She had no idea that the evening she was preparing for would become the moment her carefully built story fell apart in front of everyone she cared about impressing. The gathering began pleasantly enough, filled with warm conversation and relief that Daniel had recovered so well. When the room had settled and attention naturally turned toward him, Daniel stood, thanked everyone for their support, and then, calmly and without raising his voice, began to speak the truth. He spoke about the withdrawals from the shared account, about the hidden phone, about the hotel receipt, about the business decisions signed away during weeks he was supposedly unreachable. He did not shout or accuse wildly. He simply laid out what he had found, piece by piece, allowing the weight of the evidence to speak for itself. Vanessa's expression shifted from confusion to panic as she realized how much he actually knew. Craig attempted to explain himself, stumbling over excuses that convinced no one in the room. The gathering that was meant to celebrate recovery, instead, became the moment two people watched their carefully hidden choices become impossible to hide any longer. Within weeks, Vanessa moved out, and Craig was removed from any position of influence within the company, the business protected by contracts Daniel had quietly secured before revealing anything. In the aftermath, Daniel found himself reflecting often on how close he had come to marrying someone who saw his vulnerability as an opportunity rather than a reason for compassion. He also found himself thinking about Rosa, the woman who had never sought recognition, who had simply spoken honestly beside a bed she believed held a man who could not hear her. Her quiet honesty had done what no investigator or confrontation could have accomplished, offering him the truth simply because she had nothing to hide and no reason to pretend. Daniel made sure Rosa knew how much her presence had mattered, offering her continued work in his home along with his sincere gratitude. though she never fully understood just how pivotal her simple visits had been. As his life slowly rebuilt itself around honesty rather than performance, Daniel often thought about how strange it was that the darkest moment of pretending to be lost to the world had ultimately shown him exactly where he stood, and exactly who deserved a place beside him moving forward.